Hi, Jane. Thanks for joining us for a little interview about your work to share with the CCA community.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I think the first thing, just not everyone is probably familiar with you or your work, and I was just wondering if you could kind of tell us about your practice and what you're interested in and how you got into printmaking.
Oh my goodness, that's a long story.
Yeah.
My practice is sort of multifaceted because I do love to get outside and draw. Although I don't have time, I'm a busy mom, and I have so many things going on with my studio that often my inspiration really just comes from a lot of outdoor adventuring that I do with my family, and sometimes solo, but not very often. But what I love to do is to just play in the woods or at the coast, and from those experiences that informs the work that I do. And as you know about the whole river thing, I absolutely love playing on rivers. It's a huge part of my life. And so I get out quite a bit on rafting trips. And when I was a young person, living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, I was lucky enough to land a job in Santa Fe as a printmaker, which is kind of astounding. But I also couldn't live in Santa Fe on $7 an hour, so I ended up getting a job as a raft guide on weekends, which is how I got so into river running. And so that's why rivers usually run through all of my prints. But yeah, the Santa Fe story, I'll take you way back. I'm the daughter of an engineer, and I've always been an artist. People ask me, when did you know you're an artist? I don't remember a time when I wasn't an artist. It's just kind of a curse and a blessing all at the same time. And but I'm also the daughter of an engineer. So I love machines. I love tools. I love problem solving. And when I went to University of Massachusetts at Amherst and fell into their fantastic printmaking program, where there were all these litho presses and etching presses, and I was surrounded by like-minded people who loved to play with tools and think about the craftsmanship of the artwork as much as you're thinking about the art. I knew that I had found my tribe. So I got trained as a lithographer, which is a really kind of amazing technique, where it's a planographic technique where you're sensitizing a stone, a litho stone, or a aluminum litho plate, and you're drawing on it with greasy materials, inks and tushes and tush washes. So you really can approach it like a painter, but you're working in black and white. But you can make a black and white stone or plate for each one of those colors. So you can layer many colors to make a lithograph. And so you get these extraordinary techniques, and you can use transparent ink so that the colors blend with each other, and you can get many different colors, and you get increased depth the more layers you add. So it was right up my alley, and I got sort of overtaken by litho. And so when I went to finish it in college, I didn't know that women could get jobs as printers. When I went to New York City, I just saw these big strapping men, and they were in these giant, totally intimidating print shops. And I just figured, well, I could move to New York City and have a crazy New York adventure, or maybe I'll go out west and see what it's like out there. So I landed in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We had an old uncle that used to live there from many eons ago. Our family moved there in the 1880s, and this old uncle had passed away and moved on, but there was this amazing art community there. So I landed in Santa Fe, just figured I'd just get a job doing whatever, and looked in the phone book. Remember phone books? This was in 1989, and there were 2 print shops in Santa Fe. So one of them was a litho shop, and I couldn't believe it. It's a contract printing lithography print shop. And so I applied, took my prints in there, and Michael looked at the back and looked at the front, and he said, well, it looks like you know what you're doing, but I don't have a job for you. There's only 3 people working here. Nobody's left in like 9 years, and nobody's going anywhere. So, good luck. And he sent me on my way, and then he called me back the next day and said, "Jerk the break or quit, you have a job." So that's how I got into printmaking, really. I mean, I was way into it in college, and that was an amazing experience, but really my training happened at Hand Graphics in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I worked with all those crazy painters, and then they figured out that I learned to do etchings, and I learned multicolor etchings to work with. I learned to work with artists to develop their image, and you might have a painter coming in and not know anything about etching, so you had to teach them and work with them in creative collaboration to create an image that was on plate or a stone or maybe a wood block. And then you would the artist you'd proof with them and create this image, and then the artist would leave and you'd create the edition. And so that's how I became a printer.
Very cool. I love that. It seems like, in addition to just being very connected to rivers, you do primarily landscape in your work. And I was kind of wondering if you could talk about kind of what brought you to being someone who is attracted to landscape, and maybe how you see landscape as a subject matter in art, in 2020, and elaborate on that a little bit for us.
Well, I mean, I've always loved landscape. Ever since I was a little kid, my grandfather taught me how to fly fish, and my twin sister and I were just companions in nature growing up. That's all we did, was run around in nature and go fishing and climb trees, and we were total tomboys. So I've always been a lover of nature. And my grandfather was he was also an artist of sorts. He was a photographer, and he taught me that when you go hunting or fishing, you never take more than you need. You don't fill up your freezer full of trout. You just take what you need. And he had a real conservationist kind of an eye for the landscape and being a good steward. So he really taught me about landscapes of the West, and told me that there were amazing places out there. So I just have a real a joy and a love, and I don't know how else to explain it. There are so many writers who can explain it much more eloquently than I, but I absolutely love being in nature and working with nature as my partner to create images. And I don't know how I fell into just doing mostly landscape, but I used to do a lot of different things. I can draw and do animals, and I messed around with figures, but my landscapes really resonated with people. And like I told you earlier, it also gives me an excuse to get out in nature. And so I love to just explore the wilder places, and often that entails going on rivers, because I can get to places where sometimes people can't really go. But I also enjoy exploring the places where man has altered nature. And so one of the things I would really like to do more of is to work as basically a good steward of the landscape and the land by using my art to raise awareness about ecology and the state of our planet. It's a huge goal of mine. So that's how I tithe. I give artwork away to organizations that are working to conserve land, and I basically I dream about landscapes at night. And so I don't know why, but I have to get them out of my system and put them down on paper. Sometimes these images come out of my head, and sometimes they come out of sketchbooks. Often they come out of photographs, and sometimes I'll alter them. But I also, like I was saying, I also like exploring how man has altered the landscape. So I love exploring the places aesthetically where the land does some kind of abrupt change. So there's an edge to something, or a line, or a big contrasting block of color. Somewhere inside me, there's a Milton Avery trying to get out, and I really love some of the abstract painters and the way they approach composition. And so sometimes that's all I'm seeking, is a way to try and use landscape and to make it more abstract and to get more captivating compositional elements going. And basically I almost never put a blue sky in my artwork because I love the drama that's created by crazy raging storms and clouds, and whatever it is that's going to come out of the sky is going to hit the land somewhere. And also rivers and water provides me with a way to play with that surface and how light reflects off of surfaces of water. So I just love exploring those things visually, and people seem to respond to them, especially my gray skies. It's funny because Portlanders, you'd think that they would be sick of gray skies, but they see them in my work and they say, those gray skies, they're so familiar. They bring me comfort, which is odd, but people seem to respond to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing for me looking at your work, it just has such a specific feeling of like a moment in time in that space. And one thing that really stands out about your process is how important mark making is, and that one little mark in the composition can become, you know, a silhouette of a cloud, or it can kind of suggest a rainstorm, or it can suggest, you know, a tide. And I'm wondering if you can talk about, you know, the process of printmaking and how those marks happen, and, you know, especially the pieces that you're also inlaying paper into, kind of how all of those processes come together for you, and what it's actually like when you're making a piece, and how much of it, you know, comes through the process as you're working.
Well, boy, there's another long story for you, because there are so many different ways that you can create a print using the various forms of printmaking. And as I was telling you, I was trained in a print shop working with other artists, so I learned all of these techniques. You know, I started out as a lithographer, but once they discovered that I could work with all those crazy painters, they put me on monotypes full time, and I printed monotypes for about 5 years. After printing just litho and etching and woodcut for 2 years, then I switched to monotype, which is a more painterly process. And so I was really educated by all of those painters that I worked with in their methods. And so I learned how to layer, color, and I learned how to use a lot of transparent base so that one color that you put down can be affected by a second color, so you create a third color. And I just really love like you say, mark making is a huge part of what I do. And with the monotype or the collagraphs, I'm really able to make those marks interact with each other in ways that you can't get in any other medium. And so part of the craftsmanship about it is to make something that works well aesthetically, but also bring in different techniques so that there's some just increased depth. I just want to involve people. I want to involve the viewer in the making of the piece, and I want them to come up and look at the image and go, how did she do that? You know, because with the monotype, you can erase, which is really fantastic. I'm a terrible watercolorist, but I love, because everything I do, I need to mess with it. I need to scratch it. I need to take tarlatan and mess it up. I need to use my physicality, because I'm a very physical person. So I love to just apply ink, big layers of big blocks of ink with a roller, and then take a rag that might have some paint thinner in it and just scratch through that layer. And I love when the solvent interacts and you get these stripes that happen. And they remind me of the lithography, of the washes that you can get with lithography. And so I just get so absorbed in it. Sometimes I set to work on a print that I think is going to take me a couple hours, and then I look up and it's dawn, and I've been at my studio all night. I mean, it's so easy for that to happen. But as a printmaker, you know, I'm supposed to be making multiples so that I can create many prints out of this one plate so that it'll be quicker to produce the work. And then the idea is that I can sell that work for less money. So I'm more of an egalitarian artist. I want to get my work out there to as many people as I possibly can. And I want to sell it to normal people like bus drivers and school teachers. But the problem is that, I guess I just love doing those one-of-a-kind images, and I get a little bored with editioning, as this happens to a lot of printmakers I know. But so sometimes I create a hybrid of that thing, which is I create a plate that has some texture on it. And so I've really fallen into collograph lately as a way of producing work, because it's really fast to make an encaustic collograph. You basically, a collograph is a print that you make from a plate that's been collaged. So you have these collage elements that are on the plate that are in there that you can keep repeating. And so you have a plexiglass, clear plexiglass plate, and you get the wax painted onto it so that there's this layer of white wax, and the wax goes on hot, and then as soon as it starts to cool, it starts to harden up, and you can get really different textural effects by that stuff cooling, and you're continuing to brush with a brush, and it builds up more and more taller and taller wax layers. You have to be careful to not make the layers too thick, but once again, it creates layers that are unique, and a lot of the elements of the marks. The mark making is totally accidental. And so that for me brings in, it sort of takes some of the responsibility off of me as a person making the mark to have these accidental things taking place. So I really get a lot of joy out of that. And we call them happy accidents. When you make a mark and you'll never be able to repeat it. It's just this perfect thing. And sometimes it's not perfect, and you mess it up, and then you have to go back in and rearrange it. And sometimes that's when you get the more interesting stuff that happens, because you're taking chances, because it's like, well, I've already ruined it. I can't ruin it any further, so I may as well do this. And you get out a tool and you start scraping away, and then you get to the really interesting stuff. Mm-hmm. So anyway, with the collograph, you are creating a texture on this plate, and then that wax hardens, and then you can ink it up with water-based ink. I use Akua quite a bit in my work. It's soy and honey-based ink. It's non-toxic, and you clean it up with soap and water, which is fabulous. And I use Akua because if you use oil-based ink with wax, beeswax would be melted by the petroleum, the solvent in the oil-based ink. So it will all get stuck and glued to the paper. So you have to use water-based ink. And so I paint the ink on, or I squeegee it on with a cardboard tab, and then I wipe the ink off with a tarlatan, which is a really heavily sized piece of cheesecloth. And you can really mess with how much you wipe it. So you can leave a lot of ink behind or just a little. You can make, once again, you can use transparent base in the ink so that you get really subtle pale layers, and then you layer another plate on top of that has a different element. So sometimes I'll create a plate that just has the foreground, and then like the river in the front, and then I'll have a second plate that might have the middle ground, and a third plate will have the sky. And sometimes I can combine those plates, like I can put blue water and blue sky on the same plate and leave the middle blank, and then I'll print that on a piece of paper, and then I'll have that second plate inked up with the middle ground, and maybe it'll have a layer of yellow down below that'll interact with that layer of blue. So you can really layer things And once again, it's just problem solving. It's just fun for me you have to sort of think it out ahead of time, and it just makes it more interesting.
Yeah, I could listen to you talk about that all day. I'm glad you said happy accident, because I was actually going to say it, and I was like, maybe Bob Ross isn't the right person to change in relation to your work. But I feel like, there are these things happening in your compositions that I can tell are kind of just come out of the process. And I love hearing about that layering, because I wasn't aware that you were doing them in multiple plates and prints. It's so interesting. Unfortunately, I have to go open the gallery in a few minutes, but I have one last question for you, which isn't exactly about your work, but I was wondering if you could tell me what you love about CCA and what your experience showing here has been like.
Well, I have a long and storied history with CCA. Some people know that I used to live in Hood River a long time ago. I actually moved to the Dalles when I first left Santa Fe, New Mexico. I wanted to move to a place where life was inexpensive, so I could do more artwork and spend less time working. And so I moved to the Dalles and bought a house on a cliff. It was amazing. But I really needed an art community. And so I was spending more and more time in Hood River. And I eventually moved to Hood River and found that art community with the CCA. Back then it was called Columbia Art Gallery. And I'm quite sure I had a solo show at some point soon after I moved there. And I was just sort of embraced by the people there. And I found a lot of kindred spirits, especially with the number of landscape artists that work there. And I just remember a lot of the lifelong friends I made. Daryl Lloyd, who's a photographer, Sarika Meek, who joined me in a studio that I put together with Sarika and Thad Perry. And Thad Perry was in the Columbia Art Gallery too. And so he tied me into the rest of the community, and then we created a little art studio out there. But really, I think that my art life would have been seriously empty without the CCA, because once again, it serves to bring artists together. And when artists get together, we can bounce ideas off of each other, and maybe we can have an informal critique. We just get support, and it's so very important for artists to have that support. It's really an essential part of being a creative person, is having people around you who are like-minded, and you can get together and compare notes or share tools and share ideas. And the CCA served that role really well for me. So then I moved to Portland, and I continued to show on occasion in group shows, which was really great because it allowed me to come back to the community and visit old friends again. But I eventually moved my press to Portland, where I had, a chance to contact more artists and people who didn't know about printmaking, and I could become their teacher. Because I guess deep down inside, I'm really a teacher and a collaborator, and I love being a master printer because it allows me to pursue my own, pursue other people's ideas, but use my skills to bring some element to it that person needs to be able to pull it off. And it was just a joy to get a phone call from Sarika and Leith inviting me to the show there, and I really appreciate all of your efforts to put it together. It was a fantastic group. The four of us are so different, and I really didn't know the other artists besides Sarika, but it was just fantastic to meet those other women and to see what they're doing with so many varied techniques and materials. And it was, once again, it was just a joy to be a part of the show, and I'm really, truly honored.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been here that long, and I'm just so enjoying being in this space every day with all this work that, there's similar themes running through it, but in terms of the way you all are approaching that subject matter, couldn't be more different. So thanks for bringing us so much work and taking a moment to speak with me before you go on your next adventure.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, Carolyn, and thank you once again. If you guys weren't there doing this, what you do every day, I would not get to do what I do, because artists need galleries. We need communities so that we can get our work out there. And I so appreciate you guys being there and spreading the word about the artwork.
Yeah, thank you.